Just down the road from the residence of Annie Guthrie and Tomaso sits a local filling station. It is a location that everyone tracking this investigation has completely overlooked. A crypto kiosk stands inside, the sort where folks trade digital currency or pull out cash. The extortion letters delivered following the snatching of Nancy Guthrie specifically called for Bitcoin. Federal agents checked out that particular shop. It was not the spot near the victim's place, but the one right by her daughter and son-in-law's residence. This specific fact was buried in a chronological record that nobody has mapped out right. Once I started digging, several other inconsistencies began to surface. On January 11th, the very night the intruders stood on the front steps, an online search for the home address was recorded. That ping came from Tucson, not some far-off state or through a masked connection. Tucson is where Annie and Tomaso stay, just 4 miles from the crime scene. It is the same city where the individual busted for the crypto threats sent his messages to the husband's private phone instead of the famous sister in New York. Then I noticed a piece of evidence that has been sitting right in front of us since day one. The victim's vital cardiac medicine was still sitting on the kitchen counter, totally ignored. Her next pill was scheduled for 10 p.m., just 10 minutes after the son-in-law dropped her home. The local authorities stated she would not last 24 hours without that medication. If the goal is a payday, you have to keep the person breathing, which means you grab the meds. They were sitting right there in plain sight. It takes 5 seconds to grab them, yet they were left behind. I have spent the past 7 days dissecting every extortion letter, every demand, and every logistical map regarding the talk between the supposed captors and the family. My conclusion is that the whole kidnapping for profit angle, which the entire investigation followed because of the brothers' initial call, simply falls apart. The abandoned pills, the written threats, and the physical distances involved all prove that theory is dead. This breakdown will show you exactly how the narrative crumbled. Hit that subscribe button and toggle the bell. Let us dive in. Those demands started hitting in early February, arriving in various hands. The specifics of these messages have never been pieced together correctly until this moment. The first batch landed on February 2nd and 3rd, shortly after Nancy vanished. They demanded $4 million in cryptocurrency by 5 p.m. on the 5th. Failure to pay would see the price tag jump to $6 million by 5 p.m. on February 9th. The letters claimed her life was hanging by a thread, using ominous warnings tied directly to those tight windows. They provided a specific digital wallet that was checked and found to be active on the blockchain, meaning it was a real account ready for a transfer. What was actually written in those messages should have been the top story on every news broadcast in the country. The writer mentioned secret details about the property, like the busted security light and the exact spot where the smartwatch was sitting. This was classified info that only someone inside that house on that specific night could possibly know. Consider the implications. The author was either standing in that room watching the crime unfold, or they were getting fed play-by-play info from someone who was. There is no other way around it. You do not just guess where a tiny piece of tech is sitting inside a house you have never stepped foot in. A major entertainment outlet got one of the main letters. The lead editor described the writing as polished, well-organized, and incredibly articulate. This was not some messy scroll. It was professional, structured, and penned by someone with a high level of education. Contrast that with a person on the doorbell cam, wearing a mask and a cheap backpack, who had his weapon holster on wrong and tried to hide from a camera with a flower pot. That guy looked like he had never even held a gun before. Those two identities are a total mismatch. The person writing the checks is not the same person standing on the porch. The levels of competence and planning are worlds apart, suggesting either a team effort between a brain and a brawn, or that the letters were a staged attempt to frame a crime that was never about money. Then a totally different message showed up at the news desk on February 11th. This new sender was not the original group. They wanted just one Bitcoin, about $66,000 to $77,000, in exchange for a name. They claimed to be an outside observer with inside info. Here is the part everyone missed. This person tried to reach out to the siblings in Arizona, Annie and Cameron, rather than the famous one. Why go to the two siblings on the ground in the desert instead of the famous sister in New York? Why would a witness bypass the famous media personality to talk to the local family members? She is the one with the global reach and the deep pockets, the one whose status supposedly started this whole mess. It only makes sense if the source believed the truth was closer to the Arizona siblings. It suggests the mystery was not in New York, but right there in Tucson. Another letter arrived on February 18th, this time asking for a different digital coin. It was far more violent and descriptive about the consequences. A fresh digital address was included. Federal agents even looped in Mexican authorities over this one. Then, everything went cold. Not a single word from the senders for almost 2 months. Eventually, the famous sister did a major interview and mentioned a detail that has been hanging over this investigation like a thick fog. She claimed one of the letters felt like an apology. The writer seemed to feel bad. They claimed they had no clue the victim was so elderly and weak. Let that sink in for a second. You have a person cold enough to drag an 84-year-old out of bed in the middle of the night without shoes or medicine, and now they are saying, "Sorry, we didn't know she was sick." That is not how professional criminals work. That is not the way real kidnappers talk to their victims' families. In over half a century of recorded hostage cases, there has never been an instance of a captor sending a get-well-soon style apology regarding the victim's health. That simply doesn't occur. It's impossible because the type of monster who'd hurt Nancy Guthrie that way lacks the mental wiring to ever feel bad, let alone write down those regrets and mail them to her grieving relatives. Just look at how much these letters clash with one another. The initial ones are detached and calculated, full of deadlines, intimidation, and rising ransoms, the talk of a predator. Yet, the apology is suddenly tender, mourning, and almost sweet. You aren't looking at the same person there. The emotional energy is completely different. It's like reading a stiff extortion letter from a corporate shark followed by a sympathy card from a nice neighbor. The voice is inconsistent because the writer changed or the motive shifted. Those early notes were purely meant to create the illusion of a kidnapping for money. That written mea culpa served as a way to wrap things up, giving the family an excuse to call off the search and buy into the lie that Nancy passed away from a botched job rather than a calculated hit by a trusted confidant. Check the timeline. The main demands showed up on February 2nd and 3rd, barely 48 hours after she went missing, yet the cutoff wasn't until 5 p.m. on February 5th. That's a 4-day gap after the snatching. If you're holding a living person for a payday, you don't stall for 4 days. You provide a sign of life right out of the gate. You get the victim on the line. You snap a picture with the morning paper to prove the date. You manufacture a sense of panic, because that's where your power lies. These messages set hard dates, but never once offered a shred of proof that she was breathing. Never a single photo, audio clip, or video surfaced to show Nancy Guthrie was still with us when those orders were drafted. The family played ball. Savannah and her siblings even filmed a plea. On film, they stated, "We got the message and we're ready to comply. Please just send our mom home. She's everything to us and the cash is waiting." Those clips went live. The $1 million bounty was publicized. Then, total radio silence. No handoff occurred. No wiring info arrived. No sign of life followed. The clock ran out. The messages dried up, and the pile of cash sat there collecting dust. Former Fed Steve Moore argues that the bounty stays untouched because only the guilty parties actually know the truth. That is a sharp, expert take on the situation. Had an outsider snatched Nancy for the money, that $1 million payout would have cracked the silence months ago. Someone would have spilled. A partner, a cellmate, or a drunk buddy who heard a slip-up. In standard pay-to-play kidnappings involving strangers, the cash almost always flips a witness. But when the ones in the know are the ones who did the deed, they stay quiet to avoid a life sentence. Maybe that note didn't come from a criminal. Maybe it came from someone who wanted the family, and Savannah especially, to look the other way. Someone needed Savannah to think her mother's passing was a freak accident during a messy grab, not a cold-blooded murder by a familiar face. A tragic mishap with a stranger is one thing. A targeted hit by someone close to the New York circle is a different beast entirely. That note, the apology, and the claim about her failing heart are the only things bridging those two narratives. Now, let's talk about the prescriptions, because that's where this whole snatch and grab story falls apart under the weight of basic common sense. Nancy Guthrie's cardiac pills were sitting right on her counter on the morning of February 1st, untouched. She was supposed to take her night dose around 10 p.m. She was home by 9:50. The meds were right there in plain sight, a clear bottle sitting on the kitchen surface. The sheriff went on record saying Nancy might not last 24 hours without those pills. Medical pros estimated she had 72 hours at the absolute most. If you're snatching someone for a payday, and your only goal is keeping them alive to get paid, you grab the medicine. It is the most vital object in the entire house for your scheme to work. Without those pills, your prisoner dies and your bargaining chip is gone. You don't have to be a doctor to get it. You don't need to understand how the heart works. You just swipe every container on that counter and bolt. It takes 5 seconds. You're already inside. You're already taking the woman. The bottles were right there, yet they stayed put. And it wasn't just the heart meds they ignored. Nancy's cell was left on the nightstand. If you're running a ransom scheme, that phone is your lifeline for making contact. You use it to show she's alive. You force her to say a few words to her daughter. At the very least, you take it so the cops can't ping her location. They left the phone. They left the bag. They even left the cash inside the wallet. They bypassed the meds and took nothing but Nancy. That points to one of 3 conclusions. Either they had no idea she was on medication, which flies in the face of how calculated this hit was. 3 weeks of casing the place, killing the cameras, learning the grounds, and even using flower pots as markers in the dark. You don't pull off that kind of recon and miss the pill bottles on the counter, or they knew and just didn't care, meaning her survival wasn't the goal. The ransom was either a fake story cooked up later, a minor detail they never cared about, or they knew but panicked when the job went sideways inside the house. This is where the hearing aids change everything. Nancy pulled those high-powered devices out every single night before hitting the sack. Without them, she was basically stone deaf. If a person walked into that bedroom and barked orders like, "Get up," "Follow me," "Keep quiet," Nancy wouldn't have heard a thing. She didn't follow orders because she couldn't hear them. If you're towering over an 84-year-old woman in the dark and she's just staring, not moving or reacting to your threats, and you don't know she's deaf, things get violent fast. A shove, a punch, a hard fall against the furniture, and suddenly there's a crime scene. That sequence, no hearing aids, ignored orders, the struggle perfectly explains the blood found by the front door. It explains why the house was spotless until the exit point. It explains why the medicine stayed on the counter, because the original plan shattered before they even hit the kitchen. It explains the sudden pivot to the front door and that apology note. The line about not knowing she was fragile describes the exact second the situation spun out of control. The second Nancy didn't react. The second they realized she couldn't hear a word. The second, the whole job changed. But here is the detail that should be giving the cops nightmares. If the intruder didn't know about the hearing aids, or that Nancy was deaf without them, that's a massive hole in their intel. They knew where the cameras were, they knew the flower pots, the house layout, and which nights she'd be alone, yet they missed the hearing aids. That suggests 2 possibilities. Either the person who did the homework wasn't the one who went through the door. The mastermind knew the score, but the muscle didn't. Or the hearing aids were a secret even an insider wouldn't know because Nancy only took them out in private and downplayed her hearing loss. Either way, the logic about the medication remains solid. All 3 roads lead to the same spot. The ransom theory is toast. You don't leave the medicine behind if the goal is a payout. A simple prescription vial sitting on a kitchen island reveals more about that crime scene than 60 days of official police briefings. Let's talk about the rucksack. Since people have been guessing about its contents for a while, yet the obvious truth remains unsaid. Look closely at that Ring camera footage. That Ozark trail bag is clearly stuffed to capacity. However, as the person of interest reaches down to grab that potted plant to block the lens, the backpack fails to sag or shift like a heavy load would. It never even nudges his center of gravity. The mass inside is distributed perfectly and feels featherweight. Whatever he is carrying isn't heavy-duty machinery or construction gear. You won't find handcuffs, plastic ties, or rolls of silver tape in there. It lacks the typical abduction gear found in every kidnapping where the goal is to keep a victim alive. The shape suggests something thin and folded, like industrial plastic, a bedsheet, or a heavy quilt. If you intend to hold someone for a payoff, you bring items to restrain them. You carry equipment to keep a prisoner secure during the drive. You bring the supplies for holding someone captive. If you are moving a corpse, however, you bring a shroud. You need a wrapper so that no forensic evidence or bodily fluids end up in your car, on your clothes, or on your hands. The profile of that bag, bulky but effortless to carry, with no sharp protrusions, perfectly matches a folded floor covering, not a kidnap kit. It is a disposal kit, the kind you pack when you know your target isn't walking away. Moving on to the flower containers, 3 separate entrances were found wide open on the evening Nancy vanished. The rear kitchen entrance was wedged open with a ceramic pot. The glass slider on the patio was blocked open with a pot, and even the side entrance by the carport was held open the same way. All three spots utilized the victim's own planters from her backyard, snatched up in the darkness and placed without a second thought by someone who knew exactly where they sat and how much they weighed. Television host Ashley Banfield verified that the intruder used the homeowner's own porch decorations to keep those doors from closing. These weren't tools brought to the scene. They were items of convenience, the sort you grab only if you have spent time on that property before. It is what happens when you have the map memorized, when your hands find what they need in the pitch black exactly where you thought they would be. Consider the logistics. That rear kitchen door has a mesh security screen that opens from the left. The intruder has to pull that screen back, snag a heavy pot, wedge it, then swing the main door open and use another pot for that one. Two separate doors, one frame, two pots used quickly in total darkness. That isn't a spur-of-the-moment move. That is the work of someone who practiced this entry or walked through it on a previous night when no crime was committed. The side gate was also propped wide. That entrance sits right by the garage, the same spot where Tomaso claims he saw Nancy walk inside on the evening of January 31st. That gate serves as the main path to the rear doors. Whoever jammed it open was building a clear lane, a straight shot from the curb through the side entrance, across the yard, and into the house. This is not a lone wolf winging it as he goes. This is a meticulously mapped-out corridor. Yet, one massive question remains completely ignored. If the strategy was to drag Nancy out through the rear, which the propped gates clearly indicate, why was her blood discovered at the front door? The plan broke. They had a specific path through the back doors and over the perimeter to a waiting car, but something went sideways. One neighbor mentioned their pet woke up and started barking toward the Guthrie residence in the middle of the night. That is the same neighbor whose security cameras went dark only on the side overlooking Nancy's place. That animal doesn't usually make noise at that hour. It picked up on something happening at the back of the property, a shadow, a sound, or someone who didn't belong there. If the intruders were getting ready to leave through the back, and a dog started a ruckus, the math changes in a heartbeat. A loud dog wakes the block, neighbors check their windows, and scroll through their phone alerts. The rear exit becomes a trap, so they pivot to the front. They go through the iron gate that was already unlatched from the inside, past the doorbell unit they had already killed, and out toward the street. During that frantic exit through the main doorway, Nancy's blood stains the pavement. They wanted the back, but the evidence proves they fled through the front. The shift between those two strategies, that frantic moment of redirection, is exactly where you see that things turned chaotic inside that home. It is the point where a cold, calculated hit turned into a desperate scramble, and that panic left a trail of blood on a porch that was meant to stay clean. Now look at the residence itself. Because a police contact told News Nation on March 31st exactly what had been leaked by Banfield's team days prior. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle within Nancy Guthrie's house. The living areas were described as being in perfect order. The specific term used was pristine. No chairs were knocked over, no glass was shattered, and nothing was out of place. There was zero evidence of any physical altercation inside the home. The only proof that anything illegal happened was the bloodstain at the entrance and those doors left standing open. Reporter Brian Entin noted that this fits perfectly with Savannah's account that when the family arrived, they were confused about what had taken place. Nancy was just gone. They initially worried it was a health emergency because the doors were open and nothing seemed to make sense. A spotless house with no fight. A woman taken while wearing her sleepwear and no shoes. Her smartphone stayed on the table, her bag full of cash was left behind, her pills were on the counter, and her own pots held the doors open. That is not how a random home invasion looks. That isn't a typical violent snatch and grab. That is what happens when someone comfortable with the layout moves through the space with no hesitation. No searching for lights, no tripping, no getting lost in the dark. They went straight for the bedroom, straight for Nancy, and straight out the door. Now, I have to link two locations I talked about earlier, because in the beginning, I mentioned the service station and the web search as separate clues. Here is why their connection is actually much more sinister. That fuel station near the suspect's residence, the one with the crypto kiosk, isn't just in the neighborhood. It sits directly on the path between the two houses. If you are traveling from the suspect's place to Nancy's home in the foothills, you drive right past that station. Anyone making that trip on January 31st would see it, and someone who knows that road would know exactly what is inside, specifically the machine that takes the same digital currency mentioned in the ransom note. Furthermore, that web search on January 11th didn't just happen in Tucson. It came from the same city where the suspect was busy watching Nancy's front door in person. We are seeing two types of scouting online and on foot converging on a single mark during the exact same night from the very same neighborhood. Whoever looked up that location wasn't some random person in another state reading about Nancy Guthrie on the web. They were right there, nearby, and already keeping tabs on her. At this point, let's observe what happens to the investigation once you throw the ransom theory out the window. Once that possibility is off the table, the entire situation shifts completely. If money isn't the goal, then there was never a financial incentive for an external perpetrator. There is no upside for a stranger here. Why would someone who doesn't even know Nancy spend 3 weeks scouting, disabling every security camera, and dragging an 84-year-old woman from her own bed? The idea of this being an external hit stops making any sense. What you're left with, when the ransom falls away, is a very short list involving personal grudges. We are talking about someone wanting Nancy out of the way for reasons tied to family drama, money, or power, perhaps even a hit ordered by an insider. This fits the mastermind and henchman pattern we have been discussing for weeks now. This brings us to the security gate, which is arguably the most critical physical evidence in the whole mystery. Nancy's front door was protected by a heavy iron security screen. A neighbor named Laura, who owns an identical one, told Brian Anon that you simply cannot get past those when they are bolted. Breaking into that iron gate is simply not going to happen. Those were her words. A single person cannot force that open from the street. It is not a lock you can pick, or a door you can kick down. That barrier can only be opened by someone already inside the house. The guy seen on the porch in the doorbell video was just standing on the outside of that gate. He wasn't attempting to smash his way through. He wasn't using force at all. He was just standing there, biding his time. Eventually, the door swung open from within. If the meds on the counter debunk the ransom idea, the security gate is the smoking gun for the insider theory. There was already a person inside that home, someone with a key or access who unbolted that gate and either let the man in or handed Nancy over to him. You do not get past that iron without internal assistance. Whoever helped was either someone Nancy trusted enough to let in, or someone who possessed their own means of entry. The map of this crime keeps pointing back to the same 4-mile radius. Annie, Guthrie, and Tomaso live just 10 minutes away, and they were the last individuals to see Nancy alive. Tomaso claims he dropped her off at 9:50 p.m. and watched the garage door shut behind her. That stands as the final confirmed moment she was seen. No lens caught her actually walking into the house, and no neighbors witnessed the drop-off. Every detail after 9:50 p.m. relies entirely on Tomaso's personal account. What followed was 14 hours of total radio silence. From late that night until noon the next day, nobody tried to call or text Nancy. Not a single person drove 4 miles to check on an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition who had just removed her hearing aids in a house with disabled cameras. 14 hours is a massive window of time. It is plenty of time to drive over, do the deed, move the body, scrub the place, and get home before anyone suspects a thing. All you need to keep that window open is to simply not pick up the phone. Annie and Tomaso never made that call. Plus, the Bitcoin ATM and the online search both trace back to their immediate area. The ransom message from Derek Kayla went straight to Tomaso's private cell, not to the family or the police. Interestingly, his longtime bandmate, Dominic Evans, has a rap sheet involving theft and robbery. He matches the physical profile of the suspect and lives just minutes away. Investigators kept Annie's blue Honda CR-V for over 40 days, conducting what they called an extremely thorough search. Holding a car for 40 days is far from standard procedure. They were clearly hunting for something specific. Now photos have emerged showing people hauling boxes out of Nancy's house. This happened before she was even declared dead or a certificate was issued. I'm not making accusations here. I'm just laying out the geographical facts. And those facts keep circling back to that one address 4 miles from Nancy's door. The victim's body was definitely taken from the premises. When someone is killed by a loved one, the body is almost always moved. It isn't done to hide the crime itself, because the forensic trail will be there regardless. Moving the body is about misdirection. creating the illusion of a kidnapping to lead detectives toward a mysterious stranger and away from the people inside the inner circle. This is a classic, well-documented behavior in cases involving family or friends. The staging is meant to tell a story. A stranger broke in, took her, and vanished. That story works until you examine the evidence closely enough to realize no random intruder could have navigated that house with such surgical precision. The ransom demands are just part of the act. They are a fictional layer added on top of the crime to make the whole thing look like something it clearly isn't. The initial messages contained facts only a household member would know. Even the apology note was just emotional bait designed to stop the family from digging deeper. Then there is that third-party message from February 11th, which tries to sell information instead of actually demanding money for her return. That is a completely different goal, suggesting someone on the periphery is trying to cash in rather than the actual person who pulled it off. But the pills left on the counter are what really destroy the whole story, because a real kidnapper would never leave behind life-saving medication. Now, think about who officially cleared the family. Former prosecutor Matt Murphy recently said he would bet anything the suspect is a known criminal already in the local jail system. He described the entire police investigation as a complete disaster. He insisted that the Guthrie family should have been treated with much more respect. The man who told everyone the family was innocent, Sheriff Chris Nanos, is now facing a legal hearing on April 7th regarding his past conduct and resume lies. The local government has officially lost faith in him, voting to force him to give reports under oath so there are legal consequences if he lies to them. This is the same official who claimed a glove didn't exist, even though the FBI confirmed they found one inside the residence. He fought with 4 news networks over the doorbell images and sent DNA to a private Florida lab instead of the feds. He gave up the crime scene before the feds were even done, let a random pool guy onto the property, and set a search grid that missed a key camera. He leaked info about the pacemaker tracking technology before the search was finished, then told a radio station he hadn't made a single mistake or regret. That is the person who gave the family a clean bill of health, yet his own county won't believe a word he says without a legal oath. Meanwhile, the FBI is pulling out of Tucson. Former Fed Jason Pack claims that mystery DNA, unrelated to Nancy or her inner circle, remains the primary lead worth chasing. According to him, DNA profiling cracked the Golden State Killer mystery and solved even older cold cases. This tech is proven. The real concern is whether we get those answers before the physical samples deteriorate past the point of being useful. Savannah Guthrie heads back to the Today Show on April 6th, just before the sheriff's swearing in. Life proceeds for the family, but the case is stalled. This whole narrative was initially framed around a kidnapping. Cameron Guthrie suggested ransom during the first call, long before any note or proof surfaced. That story became the blueprint. Everything from public pleas to reward money, and Savannah's clips focused on some stranger snatching Nancy for cash. Yet, for weeks, the facts have pointed elsewhere. Those pills left on the kitchen island are the one detail that destroys the whole story. Let me lay this out again because the conclusion is undeniable once you see it. The medicine stayed put. If this were a kidnapping, you take the meds. That bag holds something thin and folded, much like a plastic sheet rather than cuffs. You bring a shroud to hide a corpse. You pack ties for a live victim. The way that pack looks reveals exactly what the plan was from the start. Those planters were grabbed from the patio in total darkness by someone familiar with the layout. 3 different entrances were left propped open. They intended to slip out the rear. Things went sideways though, so they switched their exit strategy to the front door. Porch blood indicates the change was sudden and messy. Inside, the place was spotless. No signs of a fight or a break-in at all. Whoever walked through those rooms moved with the confidence of someone who had been there 1,000 times before. Those demands mention specific details only a resident would know, such as the watch's GPS location or the security light damage. Either the author was physically present or got tipped off by someone inside. That sorry note doesn't fit the psychological profile of any abductor. It seemed meant to offer peace of mind, not to secure a payday. The goal was to steer the family's pain away from those nearby and toward a made-up story about a botched kidnapping by a stranger. A letter sent to TMZ on February 11th claimed to be from a bystander who supposedly reached out to Annie and Cameron, skipping Savannah entirely. The ransom message from Derek and Kayla popped up on Tomaso Chion's private cell. ignoring Savannah and the feds. Kayla shares ties to the Tucson music community with Tomaso. Plus, that January 11th search for Nancy's home address came straight out of Tucson. The gas station visited by investigators, the one featuring a Bitcoin ATM, sits just blocks from Annie and Tomaso's place, not Nancy's house. Annie's car was impounded for 40 days and underwent an incredibly thorough search. 14 hours went by between the moment Nancy was last seen and the first time anyone bothered to check on her. Those who account for that time gap live only 4 miles away, and belongings are being cleared out before she is even officially gone. A person snatched Nancy Guthrie from her own bedroom. They understood the layout, the security feed, and even where the patio plants sat. They knew which exits to wedge open and which to avoid. They navigated a tidy home without bumping into a single piece of furniture. They carried a bag containing a body wrap. They intentionally left her life-saving medication behind on the counter. Then, a person or perhaps an associate wrote letters to the media containing specific details only an insider would know, while demanding a Bitcoin payment sent to an address that was accessible from a machine located just blocks away from the residence of the very last person to see Nancy alive. The kidnapping story is over. Those pills in the Catalina foothills finished it. The new reality points towards someone the family wants to keep hidden. A Tucson local knows exactly what happened. All the proof suggests the culprit is much closer to Nancy than anyone has dared to admit publicly. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and leave a comment below to tell me if the kidnapping theory holds up after hearing this. The next video follows the money trail to a specific spot. What this case truly teaches us is not just about crime, but about perception, truth, and how easily narratives can mislead us. When fear takes over, people often cling to the most obvious explanation. A kidnapping for money sounds logical, even familiar, but truth is rarely that simple. This story reminds us to question assumptions, even the ones repeated by authorities or amplified by media. Small details, the kind most people overlook, can carry the weight of the truth. A bottle of medication left behind, a timeline that doesn't add up, a message that feels emotionally out of place. These are not just clues, they are warnings. It also speaks to something deeper. The danger of misplaced trust. Sometimes, the greatest threats are not strangers in the dark, but those who move comfortably within our inner circles. And when deception is carefully constructed, it can take weeks, months, or even years before reality breaks through. Above all, this case is a reminder to stay critical, stay aware, and never ignore inconsistencies. Truth doesn't shout, it whispers through details, and only those willing to listen closely will ever hear it.